This is it. A few surprises today, this morning, which is always great. My name is Bill Hart. I'm Professor Emeritus of History here at Middlebury College. And what I'd like to do is ask just a couple of questions of representatives for two of the films that we watched today, and then I'll turn the questions over to the audience. We have sitting on the far end, Jamie Unruh. Did I pronounce that right? Jamie Unruh, who is the editor of the film Living While American, right? First of all, I was really struck by that title, and I'm thinking, why not Living While Black in America? But I like this choice, Living While American. I certainly have had my encounters with police in New York City and ICE on the Canadian-U.S. border. And the criminalization of blackness is a real problem in this country. This was shot in Philadelphia. Is there a Philadelphia film crew as well?
Yes, so the director is Susanna Solomon, who I'd worked with previously on different documentary projects. Producers Howard, Tom, and Luke Slattery. Luke's New York based, but Howard and Susanna are Philadelphia based.
Wow, so ironic. The city whose name means brotherly love, right? Well, as the editor, can you tell us if you encountered any challenges in editing this film? I love the way you open it up with this anecdote of the city council person. That was really wonderful. And then end with him as well. And then in the middle, you have to drop in this testimony by this police officer who lives in upstate New York. What kind of challenges did you encounter trying to figure out where to place that versus other scenes in the film?
Yeah, well, thank you. This was definitely one of those where they had followed Isaiah Thomas for about a year, or over the course of basically like 2 years in total. And so sort of just, I received the footage and was just sort of like free for all, whatever you kind of thought the story needed to be. Absolutely that first anecdote stood out to me right away, his firsthand experience of being pulled over. And then, the police officer in the undisclosed location had a lot to say, honestly, and it'd be fascinating to listen to his stories from being in the police force and really resisting the way that the police force functions in so many ways. And like he says, he's one of the most hated Philadelphia police officers. Now, he also went to Occupy and made a stink and pissed off a lot of people. And so he's not afraid to tell you about his experience. And I think it was nice to have that. This documentary doesn't go into all the different sides of the police union and the various things that are surrounding this issue in totality. But I think the heart of it really is Isaiah Thomas and just what he believes in and what he's able to do, and also the message that things can happen on a local level. That communities, and I think the filmmakers especially, are trying to highlight that within this story, and then potentially seek other stories out of successful things happening in cities. We know what the problems are, and it's bleak. It's hard to feel like we're pushing the needle, but Isaiah Thomas is doing it here in Philadelphia with this one bill, and that bill is very effective, and it's been adopted by other cities. And so it's really great to see how government can work in certain aspects, especially with boots on the ground, like Isaiah.
Do you know if this film has been shown in other cities, municipalities?
Yeah, so it's been at other film festivals around the country, but Isaiah is actually about to take it on the road to go to universities, police unions, city councils across the country to try and spread the word about it, and then also, continue his campaign for his future in government.
Wonderful, thank you. I have other questions, but I think we should save the time for questions from the audience. I'd like to turn quickly now to the crew of Hollow Tree. Why don't you introduce yourselves and tell us what role you played on the film?
I'm Kira, and I was the director. Hi, I'm Meryl. I was an editor on the project.
I'm Isidore, and I was also an editor on the film.
Okay, terrific, thank you. I guess sorry?
So many editors.
I know.
Yeah, we should just all clap for editors. Long clap.
So one of my first questions, most basic questions is, how in the world did you come to this project and how did you meet these women? I mean, did these three young women give rise to the project, or was the project first and then you met these women? How did this all come together?
I'll answer part of it and maybe hand over to Meryl to answer part, because we worked on a short film together called Station 15 that's you can watch on PBS about a young person, and there were a young person exploring their water infrastructure in New Orleans, and we made it in a very collaborative way where we were co-learning, and she had agency in the storytelling, and began to see how the built environment reflected her own internal life as a young Black woman in New Orleans, and there seems to be a lot to explore in that concept. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that was really the sort of beginning of this project that kind of made it clear that this was a really fascinating, unique perspective to take at looking at, water infrastructure. It kind of started out as, but obviously you can't talk about that without getting into slavery, colonialism, all that stuff. But to have it through the lens of a young person learning was really incredible, and for you to do that together, that process together was amazing. So then it seemed clear after that for you to pursue it as a bigger project with a few other women, which then you went and cast.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so Mississippi River is obviously like a larger river basin, and we're talking about like much more intensive infrastructure in some ways because it affects the entire country, whereas New Orleans affects the country, but arguably not as much as river infrastructure. And we decided to work with three young women because really this film is dealing with racial capitalism as an economic system. And that's an issue that affects everyone, white people and indigenous people, really anyone in this country. And so we wanted to find three young people who were curious and introspective and down to be part of a film, which is a pretty wild thing to agree to do no matter who you are and where you are in any moment of time. And so we drove across the state for many months interviewing young people and asking them, what are you experiencing in your environment? Tanyelma was like, it's flooded here. We lost our car. I have no idea why it flooded. Kenzie knows that the land is lost and that her family is the environment is no longer what it once was. They can't fish anymore. She has no idea why. Nobody is talking about this in school. And so ultimately, these three young women stood out among many, many young people, and it was very obvious somehow that they were the young people and that their respective backgrounds and personalities and stories could coalesce to tell this bigger story about what it is to come of age in this moment of time and in this economic system. Yeah.
Did you want to add anything and comment?
I don't need to.
Okay. Well, that's one of the things I really love about this film. It's not just about exploration of climate change, but these three young women, who I thought maybe came ready-made to you as a trio, I guess not, so it's great to hear that, there's so much more going on in this film. I mean, in investigating climate change, they learn about history and family history and personal identity. Is there any important lesson you want audiences to take away from watching your film?
Izzy, you want to take that one? Anyone can put it back to me, but it's nice to hear from the whole team.
I think I hadn't seen the film in a long time, and watching it today, I was just awed by how much space there is in it and how much anyone in this room can take away what they want from it. And I think for a film that is dealing with such an urgent humanitarian, political, racial crisis, to give space to people to make their own meaning from a really dire situation is all I could hope for in my work.
Yeah, I think one thing I thought was very interesting and different about Kira's approach that really struck me in the beginning when we started collaborating together was that we can't really look at these issues of the climate crisis, racial injustice, these histories that we're grappling with, in terms of it's always this sort of how do we deal with these problems, how do we look for a way forward, when you're looking at something just even on such a core, like practical engineering issues of the Mississippi River and what's happening and the flooding issues that we all know about in Vermont this summer. It's, so many times we're looking at it from, how do we fix these problems? These are engineering problems, et cetera. And it became very clear that what was interesting about Kara's approach is that you can't jump ahead to that conversation before you've actually interrogated the values that these solutions came out of initially. And if you don't look at those value systems and really interrogate that, you're going to continue to perpetuate the problems, even if you think you're coming up with a solution from a different perspective. So that was we were like, okay, we need to make a film that's looking at that rather than trying to offer, okay, here's some things you can do by the end of the film, because it's very deep. It's like a real shift of consciousness, I think, that needs to happen. And I found that important and interesting, and how do you intertwine that with very personal stories seemed very compelling. So I think that's what we all need to do, is look in this deeper way. Yeah.
And I think you achieved that very successfully. Thank you. Let's turn to the audience now. Do you have questions for either film, Living While American or Hollow Tree? Yes.
Yeah. I want to congratulate all of you, as well as the makers of the film that weren't here. This has been a really marvelously uplifting morning, and that's been pretty rare in this festival, given the focus on issues that are challenging us all. But focusing more on the Hollow Tree film, this is partially from a personal focus as a environmental lawyer that's been concerned with and doing a lot of work with climate change. When you were sitting right behind me, you might have heard my reactions. That scene with the Corps of Engineers people was shocking to me. And frankly, this is an agency that I've dealt with, and they're very good in dealing with issues, but what they're good at is navigation. And that's the problem here, that their whole system is based on securing navigation of the Mississippi River, so St. Louis and Minneapolis and everywhere upstream could get their goods out. And there was this bargain made in the 19th century of providing the perpetual easement to flood the lands, which was ridiculous to begin with, but now you have it where people have built homes in those lands in spite of the easements. It's a no-win situation. You add to that the fact that the real problem here isn't so much the catastrophic storms, which is bad enough, but the sea level rise. When the guy was out there in the boat talking about over there that used to be on the land, I came out with the shock of the fact that the officials seem to be blind to this issue, and that's why the film works so well, because putting it in the eyes of these three marvelous young women who are seeing it and seeing the contradictions and the hypocrisies, I think what I'm going to come away with is the image of the three of them on the front deck of that boat, hugging each other, saying, maybe there's a way that these people of their generation can do something about it. So thank you.
That, for those of you who didn't hear in the back, it was a thank you for the filmmaker for making this film, especially about exposing the Army Corps of Engineers who are clueless about the rise of sea level, the rise of the sea level in the work they do. They're more effective. They paid more attention to transportation rather than rising sea level. Thank you. Do we have other questions, please? Yes.
A question about Living While American is, what is your sense of police associations or unions' responses to this kind of change in legislation, given that probably the most dangerous thing an average cop does is pull over a car, when The positive side of that for them, I would see, is sort of limiting their exposure to a dangerous scenario. If presented that way, it's not an us or them thing. It's hopefully a win-win kind of scenario.
So the question was, does Jamie know the response of the Philadelphia Police Department to this new legislation that was just passed? Driving equity, something or other?
Driving equity bill, yes. Yeah, and I won't be able to speak fully to it, but what I do know is, to your point, yeah, I think it does ease stress and tension with police officers who aren't having to pull people over, or aren't in as many of those situations on a day-to-day basis. I know in general the police unions are still resisting these types of bills because it's law and order. We have to pull people over and we have to make sure that we're making sure that we're stopping crime. So there's a lot of resistance as well from police unions. But I think it's a really good question. I don't know the full extent of their response. Like as we see in the documentary, they released a statement saying they are in full support of this bill at the time.
I know in some cities where these kinds of bills are being passed, the police force sees them as anti-police, so they stop patrolling some of these neighborhoods. In some cities I've been reading over the last year or so as a protest against these kinds of pieces of legislation. Other questions? Yes, in the back right, far right.
Thank you very much for bringing your films here, and thank you for being here and answering questions. I am not a super experienced MNFF film goer, but I have been noticing that some films attribute who the sort of main characters are speaking to, and I noticed in Hollow Tree that those names and attributions did not flash up, and I'm wondering if that was a conscious decision, and if so, why that wasn't included in those conversations.
In Hollow Tree, the lack of attribution of some of the spokespersons in the film, and their names not appearing in the credits, you're saying?
Or no, appearing as they were having.
Oh, underneath, right, like a tombstone under their
Or this
picture.
is why,
Yeah.
this is who this person is, and this is why we're having this conversation.
It's called the lower third.
There you go. Tell me about the lower thirds here.
Okay, well, every decision was conscious. We spent countless hours making this decision, and there's probably disagreements here among us still about whether or not there should be lower thirds. But ultimately, in the final phase of editing, which was collaboration between Izzy and myself, we felt like there was so much information that you were taking in this film, and what the intention was for it to be about the young women. And when you have text on a screen, you immediately go to a cerebral place where you start to think in a cerebral way about who is this person, and what are they doing, and how do I retain that. And I think ultimately we wanted to take away that moment of having to figure out or think cerebrally, and with the hope that you were just hanging out with these young women and staying emotionally by their sides as they explore. And at the point here isn't who these other people are. They all are, and they're also all equalized by not having Dr. McDowell and Shrimper. We think they're all valuable human beings, and we hope that you encounter them as human beings with varied expertise, and just stay with the emotions of the young women and their exploration.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Yes, please.
Great, thanks so much for both of these films. So we heard a little bit about where Living Well American is going to go after this, and I think it's so cool that the protagonist is going to tour the country with it. And for Hollow Tree, I mean, I thought this was such an incredible film. I've actually spent time in the Gulf and been to Whitney Plantation and toured these places, and this film was able to communicate so much about the place in such a deep and intimate, emotional way. It had more of an impact on me watching this film and actually being there. So I mean, I really would love to just hear about what your plans are for it, and how you hope it's going to kind of travel, and what.
Yeah, so what are the future plans for Hollow Tree, for airing it elsewhere?
I'd love to hand it off, but I feel like I know this question and you guys don't, so I'll just keep talking. So last year we had an impact grant from Sundance, and we did a year of screenings starting in the communities of the young women. So we screened in theaters across Louisiana and in universities and piloted various activities in the Medicine Wheel Garden, pigment making, and engaged community in conversation, and learned a lot from that. And now we're in a second phase where we're screening. Next stop is in New York City in early November. We'll be at the Museum of Moving Image, DCTV, Bronx Documentary Center, and we're aiming and partnering there with the Climate Museum. So if anyone's in New York or knows people in New York and like the movie, we have a website, hollowtreefilm.com. You can follow us and suggest to other people to come. And we're simultaneously screening in universities across the country. The girls are actually going to the Corpus Christi tomorrow and screening to kick off the school year at Texas A&M for the Gulf Scholars Program. And I mean, it's like so awesome that Izzy and I were talking about this the other day, like they can just go and they are amazing ambassadors for the film and far more. Obviously, you just watch them more compelling than us. So like, they really kick ass on stage. And yeah, so universities were in broadcast is in the works, but a year of hoping to program nationally and internationally beyond Louisiana.
Thank you very much, all of you, for coming up here and sharing the film with us.